Preparations for the exhibition of Celadon begins with a chance meeting. The repeated assessments testified to the bumpy road of its preparations. Inspections of the kiln witnessed the birth of Celadon in fire. In the spring of 2016, in Foguangshan in Taiwan, Forum on the New Energies and Values of the Museums on both sides of the Taiwan Strait was held. Luo Xiangjun, curator of Hebei Museum, attended on invitation. Meanwhile, in the Hall in Memory of the Buddha in Foguangshan, an exhibition tour titled Celadon Artistic Creations of He Zilong was taking place. It was in such a coincidence, curator Luo could see the Celadon for the first time, and was attracted by these green-colored porcelain wares with soft and smooth glaze. I felt the Celadon was very beautiful at first glance. The rays of light reflected from some points were like those from a diamond. In addition, there were many crackles in multiple layers, and this seemed quite novel to me. In order to learn more about the Celadon works, curator Luo succeeded in having an audience with the author of these porcelain wares with help of staff of the exhibition hall, Mr. He Zilong. Through deep exchanges, she learned the big difference between Celadon wares and the common green porcelain. They do not need frit before firing. In a kiln using firewood with naturally fallen ashes, they will be fully covered with glaze. In the course of his explanations, I also raised many questions. One of the questions I kept asking was, "Have you not glazed them before firing? Hadn't you glazed them?" I got his affirmative reply 100%. In fact, before entering the kiln, they had not been glazed. Upon returning to Hebei province, curator Luo shared with everyone in the museum the process of her acquaintance with Celadon, believing that the real thing that moved her was its unique artistic style and the primitive to the source firing method. Afterwards, she asked whether it was possible for him to bring his Celadon wares to Hebei Museum for exhibition. Normally, before we decide to hold an exhibition, we would organize a consistent, standard, planned, and scientific assessment of subject of exhibition we have selected, and these include assessment by experts. Put naked bases into the kiln and get products fully covered with glaze out of it. Is it really feasible to use this firing technique? All the experts present expressed an extremely cautious attitude. In fact, his firing method is the most primitive one, which usually results in a very primitive and thin layer of glazed surface and uneven parts. Our greatest suspicion of how he can use this primitive method to attain such a high level that his products are comparable to the mature glazed porcelain, we would have deemed it impossible within our cognitive ability. Since the experts had so many questions, it was better for their makers themselves to explain everything, because their perceptions are more accurate. At the invitation of curator Luo, on July 13, 2016, He Zilong and his wife made a special trip to Hebei Museum and briefed the people of the museum on the firing technology of the Celadon in great detail. In order to improve the baking process, he repeatedly dismantled his kiln and rebuilt it. And in order to raise money, he sold all of his family property. It was just with this perseverance he succeeded in using the primitive method of making fallen ashes into glaze to produce such delicate Celadon. Through this exchange, everyone had a deeper understanding of He Zilong's porcelain baking method. In the meantime, they really appreciated that this traditional technology of both sides of the Taiwan Strait had the same root and source. Under the circumstances, we launched the various preparations for the exhibition. In order to make the exhibition scientific and rigorous, curator Luo raised two demands to He Zilong. 1. Make another assessment of the Celadon. 2. Organize a field study by experts. On August 16, 2016, a symposium on Celadon was opened in Hebei Museum. The experts attending the symposium viewed videos on the process of baking Celadon, material objects, and other data, and engaged in deep discussions. I used to have special doubts. First, whether there are traces of manual work. Second, to get a certain effect, whether some changes have been made. These are the two most important points I had in doubt. This is a pillar of the kiln unearthed in the Xing kiln site. We can see from under this surface that there is a thick layer of glaze. but the upright surface has almost no green glaze. So that explains why we were doubtful about this phenomenon with naturally fallen ashes at that time. On September 7, 2016, Curator Luo arrived at Beijing Palace Museum at the head of an exhibition preparation group to visit Mr. Geng Baochang, a noted ancient ceramics appraisal expert. It was like this. After their arrival, Mr. He Zilong and his wife brought a piece of paper with a note written by Mr. Geng Baochang, which said, "Congratulate Mr. He Zilong on his success in baking Celadon." But these words are not enough for explaining its process of production. Then we want to know more through our venerable Mr. Geng. And it was in this approach we sought verification from Master Geng. After a profound inquisition of the matter, Mr. Geng expressed that in imitating primitive technology of porcelain baking by using naked bases to work out bright green Celadon, that He Zilong has inherited and made a breakthrough in China's traditional ceramics making technology. Mr. Geng, as a ceramics appraisal expert, is extremely modest. He is also of the view that there is no question about the principles of this technological process. The suggestion the venerable Mr. Geng gave us is also seeing is believing. This is also in line with our idea about how to run the exhibition. Thus, we began to arrange our tour of inspection. To acquire more reliable data, the group also secured a consensus with Mr. He Zilong on 2 points. 1. Hebei Museum dispatch relevant experts to participate in baking Celadon. 2. Choose several plain bases from Chuyang, Xingtai, Hebei Province, and place them in the same kiln to fire and compare the final result of firing. Through more than 20 days of on-the-spot investigation, the members of the first 2 batches of experts from Hebei Museum witnessed folding bases, placing plain bases in the kiln, and sealing the kiln, every step of the process. After deciding that all the bases were plain ones, and all the firewood was floatwood. By this time, to extinguish the fire and open the kiln became the expectation of everyone. They wondered whether these plain bases without frit could stand the test of the raging fire and change the Celadon full of glaze, and whether the hard work of everyone could be exchanged into a satisfactory result. On December 25, 2016, when the 3rd batch of researchers from Hebei Museum arrived at the kiln, Curator Luo, Master Mu Qin, and He Zilong and his wife jointly opened the kiln.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
The door of the kiln, which had been shut for more than 20 days, at the expectant gaze of all the people present at the scene, was slowly opened. The result was mixed. It was a pity that most of the wares appeared to have dregs, cracks, or deformations, and the 5 plain bases from Hebei were no exception. Luckily, all the plain bases in the kiln had now been covered with a layer of green glaze, and the surface of the 5 pieces from Hebei had also emerged with a bright and clean layer of glaze. It was not ideal, according to He and family, but to us, we had attained our objective. And that is, we witnessed the process of glazing of Mr. He Zilong's Celadon from plain bases. After firewood is burned into ashes and spread to all parts of the kiln, and then fall evenly on the different parts of the wares, and I feel that this is the most difficult point. It is difficult to burn firewood, and it is even more difficult for the naturally fallen ashes to become glaze. By completing the process of firing and seeing the cruel reality after opening the kiln, the experts of the inspection team thoroughly understood the 2 major features of Celadon. 1. Rarity. On average, only a few pieces of Celadon can come about. Very often the whole kiln is scrapped. 2. Uniqueness. Because of the long time needed for firing, the various uncontrollable factors may lead to crystallization, overflowing of glaze crackles, and color difference on the surface of the glaze, and that makes each Celadon ware unique. Through our efforts of more than a year, including discussions, assessment, and on-the-spot surveys, the expert group of Hebei Museum not only eyewitnessed the baking process of Celadon, but also reached consensus on the porcelain-making technology of glazing with naturally fallen ashes. He utilizes a natural resource, the floatwood as fuel, and through repeated experiments and continuous transformation of his kiln, eventually accomplished the job of placing naked bases into the kiln and getting exquisite artistic Celadon wares, fully covered with glaze, out of the kiln. Some people say that it is a rebirth of a lost ceramics technology. Others say it's a new breakthrough of contemporary ceramics art. Today, through efforts of Hebei Museum, Celadon has made its successful debut in Hebei. In order to further expound and prove this porcelain firing technique, the inheritance and development of China's traditional glaze of plant ashes, an international academic symposium was held in May 2017 in Hebei Museum. Where do the charms of Celadon lie? All our friends who love ceramics are warm-heartedly invited to appreciate together.